Hey everybody. When you look at the news today, there's so much going on, and sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's easy for me to check out emotionally from what is happening because in the city that I live in, it seems peaceful. Sometimes it seems very different what's happening in Canada than other parts of the world, and today or this last week, it hit home a lot closer for me in terms of what I saw in the news with the death of George Floyd down in Minneapolis. The area that George Floyd died in was my old neighborhood. I used to live there. Where he died was just a few blocks away from where I lived back in the late '90s when I was going to university, and I still have friends who live there, people who are a part of that community, and so it's hit home. The neighborhood that I lived there in Minneapolis was a mainly black neighborhood. Um, it was a mainly black community that was one of the poorest in the city, and so what was typical there in Minneapolis and many other cities in the United States is that you have those who have money living out in the suburbs, and those are typically the white neighborhoods. And you have those who are poor and in poverty living in the inner city. And to be honest, those were neighborhoods that were mainly of color. And I lived right there in the middle of it for several years. Several blocks down the road was the church that I attended, the Inner City Church of Minneapolis. It was a mainly black church that reached out to the people of that city in many, many different ways, making an impact. And it's really, really cool to see that they're still making an impact today. Just checking up on them today, seeing that after almost 30 years, the same pastors, Pastor Chris and Monica De Laurentiis, leading that church, making an impact. And in the midst of this crisis, of racism and riots down in the States, that the church is a light in a dark place. You might not see it in the news, but that is happening down there today. And I watched a short video clip of my old pastor, Pastor Monica, today. She was talking about the riot. She's talking about the church and what they're doing there, and she mentioned a scripture that I just thought was really, really relevant for us today from Micah 6:8. Micah was a prophet to Israel in the Old Testament. And in this passage of scripture, Micah is talking to the people of Israel, and he's saying to them that they're offering up their sacrifices, they're doing their religious rituals, but their heart isn't in it. And in the midst of their religious ritual, their life doesn't reflect what they are doing in terms of their religious ritual. And in Micah 6:8, this is what he says. It says, "He has told you, O man, what is good." That he is talking about God. He says, God has told you, O man and woman, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? Such a good question. What does the Lord require of us? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. That word justice is talked about a lot today. For us to want justice, for us to live that out, we all desire justice in this situation, in the death of Mr. Floyd. Not just for George Floyd and his family, but for all of those that are discriminated against because of the color of their skin. To want that justice. But next to that is to love kindness. And the last part says to walk humbly with your God. It's interesting how that justice and the humbleness is next to each other in that passage. To walk humbly with our God. What does that look like? What does it look like for me, a white male living today, to walk humbly? Maybe it's to ask some hard questions, to ask and realize, what part do I play in this? What seeds of racism have I harbored in my heart? And that's something that I've had to deal with over the years, and something that it's brought me back to again this last week. Are there seeds of racism in my heart? Are there things that are underlying that I don't even realize? Maybe another question, how do I walk humbly with my God, is how have I in my silence been complicit to this? It's easy to be silent and to think that we've done nothing wrong. Have I stood up for justice? Have I stood up for those that need a voice or have been affected by racism? That we can't just not be racist within our own hearts, but that God calls us to love justice, and like Jesus, to stand up for those who are marginalized. It's easy to dismiss what is happening down in the United States as just something that affects them, and that doesn't affect us up here in Canada, but it does affect us too. Maybe it's not as overt, it might be more hidden, but it can be just as much there. How do I walk humbly with my God? To grieve with those who grieve, and to mourn with those that are mourning, to mourn with those that are mourning down in the States, and to grieve with them, and to maybe to be a voice for them. My prayer is that all of this that is happening wouldn't just change things down the United States, but I pray that it would change things here in Canada and around the world. It is not something that is just in one country, but it is all around the world. God, I pray that you change the world. I pray that you would change our hearts.